Welcome back to the Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something that honestly saves developers a ton of time and prevents some major headaches. We're diving into Kubernetes ConfigMaps. All right, to really get this, let's start with a scenario. And trust me, it's a painful one that almost every development team has gone through at some point. So, picture this. You've got an app running live, and you need to make one tiny change, just a single setting, like updating a database address. I mean, that should be simple, right? It's just one line. Well, not so fast. If you're doing it the old way, that one little change kicks off this ridiculously slow and risky process. You've got to go into the code, rebuild the entire application image, push that new image to a registry, update your deployment files, and then finally redeploy the whole thing. It is literally like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So much work for such a tiny change. So, why? What's the real problem here? What's causing all this friction? To figure that out, we need to look at the blueprint of the application itself. And here it is. The problem is hard coding. Things like database hosts, API URLs, logging levels, they're baked directly into the application's Docker file. Think of it like this. Those values are mixed into the concrete when you build a house. Once that concrete is set, you can't just change the ingredients. You need a jackhammer. And this really gets to the heart of the matter. The old way of thinking was that configuration is just part of the build lifecycle. So if you want to change a setting, well, you have to kick off a whole new build. It's all tied together. But what if there's a better way? What if we could break those two things apart? Separate the part of the app that does the work from the instructions that tell it how and where to do it. I love this analogy because it makes it so clear. Think of your code as the car's engine. It's the powerful, complex part that makes everything go. And you don't want to rebuild it every single day. The configuration, on the other hand, that's just the GPS coordinates. It's the destination you're plugging in. And that can change all the time, right? You don't need a new engine just to go to a different grocery store. And that's the whole goal here, separating the configuration from the application code. This isn't just, a nice to have. It's a foundational principle of modern cloud-native software development. It's a huge part of what people call the 12-factor app methodology. Okay, so if separation is the goal, how do we actually do it in Kubernetes? Well, this is where the hero of our story comes into play. Let's talk about the config map. So what is a config map? Honestly, the simplest way to think about it is like an external notebook of settings for your app. It's a Kubernetes object that holds all that configuration data, your GPS coordinates, as simple key value pairs. It lives inside Kubernetes, totally separate from your application image. So what kind of stuff do you put in there? Well, it's perfect for non-sensitive data. Think database hosts, API URLs, feature flags, logging levels, that kind of thing. But, and this is really important, it is absolutely not for secrets. I'll say it again, do not put passwords, API tokens, or private certificates in a config map. Why? Because they're stored in plain text. They are not encrypted. We have a different tool for that. Okay, great. So we have this external notebook of settings. How does our application actually read from it? Well, Kubernetes gives us a few really flexible ways to do this. First, you can use env to grab just one specific value and turn it into an environment variable. That's like tearing a single page out of the notebook. Second, you can use env from, which takes all the key value pairs from the config map and injects them as environment variables. It's like photocopying the whole notebook. And finally, you can mount it as a volume. This one's a bit different. It makes each key in your config map show up as a file inside your container. This is super useful for things that expect a configuration file, like Nginx. All right, so that's the how, but why is this such a game changer in the real world? Let's look at what happens when you're working at scale. Let's imagine your company has, say, 50 different microservices running. And of course, each of those 50 services needs to run in multiple environments. You've got your development, your staging, QA, and of course, production. So that's 4 environments right there. Now, if you're hard coding your configuration, what does that mean? It means 50 services times 4 environments. You're looking at 200 times different application images you have to build, test, store, and manage, all because of a few tiny differences in configuration. It's an absolute logistical nightmare. But now, look at the difference with a config map. The old way, edit code, rebuild, push, redeploy, a whole CI/CD pipeline gets triggered. The new way, You edit one little config map file, you tell Kubernetes to restart the pod so they pick up the change, and that's it. You're done. In seconds. There's no new image build, no big deployment process. It's not just faster, it's safer, cleaner, and just a much, much smarter way to work. This flips that old idea completely on its head. Configuration is no longer part of the build lifecycle. Instead, it becomes part of the runtime lifecycle. It's a living, flexible setting that you can change while your application is running. So this leaves us with one final, very important thought. We've solved the configuration problem for all our non-sensitive data, which is awesome. Our deployments are now safe and flexible. But what about those passwords and API tokens we talked about earlier? That raises a whole new question, right? How do you handle the really sensitive stuff? Well, for that, Kubernetes has another trick up its sleeve.